The sun blazed mercilessly over the Texas plains as Samuel Mackenzie wiped sweat from his weathered brow. His cattle ranch stretched endlessly across the dry landscape, where dust devils danced in the scorching afternoon heat. The drought had lasted 3 months, turning once green pastures into cracked earth that crunched under his boots. Samuel had built his ranch from nothing 20 years ago, arriving as a young man with little more than determination and a handful of cattle. He worked sunrise to sunset, fighting harsh winters, blazing summers, and everything nature threw at him. The neighboring ranchers respected him for his honest dealings and fair treatment of his workers, though they often warned him about the Apache tribes that roamed the territory. On this particular day, Samuel was checking the water levels in his wells when he heard a sound that made him freeze. A low groan echoed from behind a cluster of mesquite trees near his property line. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle slung across his shoulder, but something in the tone of that groan stopped him from drawing the weapon. Cautiously, Samuel approached the sound. What he found changed everything he thought he knew about the people his neighbors feared. A young Native American man lay crumpled against a boulder, his dark skin pale from blood loss and dehydration. A deep gash ran across his shoulder, and his leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. The man's horse stood nearby, nickering softly and nudging its fallen rider with its muzzle. Samuel knelt beside the wounded stranger, checking for signs of life. The man's breathing was shallow but steady. His clothes were torn and dusty, suggesting he had been riding hard for days. Samuel noticed the intricate beadwork on the man's vest and the quality of his leather boots. This was no ordinary traveler. Without hesitation, Samuel lifted the unconscious man and carried him toward his ranch house. The stranger was heavier than he looked, all lean muscle and sinew, but Samuel had spent years hauling feed sacks and wrestling cattle. He managed to get the man inside and onto his own bed, then rushed to gather supplies. Samuel had learned basic medical care from his late wife, Martha, who had tended to injured ranch hands and sick animals with equal skill. He cleaned the shoulder, wound carefully, noting that it appeared to be from a bullet rather than an animal attack. The leg was definitely broken, but the bone hadn't pierced the skin. As Samuel worked, he found himself studying the man's face. He appeared to be in his early 20s, with strong features and calloused hands that spoke of a life spent outdoors. A leather pouch hung around his neck, and Samuel caught glimpses of what looked like carved bone and turquoise inside. The rancher spent the next several hours setting the broken leg as best he could and bandaging the shoulder wound. He gave the man small sips of water and tried to get him to take some broth, though most of it dribbled down his chin. As evening fell, Samuel sat in a chair beside the bed, watching his unexpected patient and wondering what had brought him to this remote corner of the ranch. The man stirred several times during the night, mumbling words in a language Samuel didn't understand. Sometimes he seemed to be calling out names, and once he sat up abruptly, eyes wide with fear, before Samuel gently pressed him back down onto the pillows. Samuel barely slept that night, checking on his patient every hour and keeping a cool cloth on his fevered brow. He had made a choice that many of his neighbors would call foolish or dangerous, but something deep in his gut told him it was the right thing to do. His mother had always taught him that kindness was never wasted, no matter who received it. As dawn approached, Samuel made coffee and prepared a more substantial broth, hoping his patient would be strong enough to take some nourishment. He had no idea that his simple act of compassion had set in motion events that would echo across the plains for generations to come. The wounded man opened his eyes just as the first rays of sunlight crept through Samuel's bedroom window. His dark eyes darted around the unfamiliar room, taking in the simple wooden furniture, the clean white sheets, and the bearded white man sitting beside his bed with a cup of steaming coffee. Samuel set down his cup and leaned forward slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Easy there, friend. You're safe. I found you hurt by the mesquite trees yesterday." The young man tried to sit up, then winced as pain shot through his shoulder and leg. He said something in his native tongue, then switched to heavily accented English. Why you help me?" Samuel reached for a cup of water he had prepared. "Because you needed help. That's reason enough." He offered the cup carefully. "What's your name, son?" The man studied Samuel's face for a long moment as if trying to read his intentions. Finally, he accepted the water and took a small sip. "I am called Running Bear, of the Mescalero Apache." Samuel nodded. "I'm Samuel Mackenzie. This is my ranch. You've got a broken leg and a bullet wound in your shoulder. You've been unconscious for nearly a day." Running Bear's eyes widened with alarm. "A day? No, I must go. My people, they will think—" He struggled to rise again, but Samuel gently held him down. "You're not going anywhere with that leg, and you'll bleed to death if you tear those stitches. Whatever's waiting for you out there can wait another day or two." Running Bear shook his head frantically. "You do not understand. I carry message. Important message. If I do not return, my people will think I am dead. They will think the white soldiers killed me." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of message?" "Peace message," Running Bear said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "From my chief to the Indian agent at Fort Stockton. We want to stop the fighting. Too many of our young men have died. Too many of your people have died." The rancher sat back in his chair, absorbing this information. The newspapers had been full of stories about increasing tensions between the Apache tribes and the army. Just last month, a wagon train had been attacked 50 miles south, and the army had retaliated by burning a Apache village. "Who shot you?" Samuel asked quietly. Running Bear's jaw tightened. "Not your soldiers. White men, but not soldiers. They wear no uniform. They want the fighting to continue." He touched the leather pouch around his neck. "They tried to take the peace papers." Samuel felt anger rising in his chest. He had heard rumors about men who profited from the conflict, selling weapons to both sides and stirring up trouble to keep government contracts flowing. "Did they follow you here?" "I do not think so. My horse is fast and I know the land, but they may still look for me." Running Bear met Samuel's eyes. "You should not have helped me. If they find me here, they will hurt you too." Samuel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his peaceful ranch. His cattle grazed contentedly in the distance, and his hired hands were already starting their morning chores. He had built this life through honest work and fair dealing. The thought of armed men threatening his home made his blood boil. "Let me worry about that," Samuel said, turning back to Running Bear. "Right now you need to heal, and maybe we need to figure out how to get your message where it needs to go." Running Bear studied the rancher's face. "Why do you care about Apache peace message?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer. "I've lived on this land for 20 years. I've seen good people die on both sides of this fight. If there's a chance to stop the killing, I figure that's worth risking something for." Running Bear nodded slowly. "You are not like other white men I have met. And you're not like what I expected from an Apache warrior," Samuel replied with a slight smile. "Maybe that's the problem. We've all been listening to stories instead of talking to each other." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses reached their ears. Samuel moved quickly to the window and peered through the curtains. 3 riders were approaching the ranch house at a steady pace, and even from a distance, Samuel could see they were heavily armed. "Looks like we might get that chance to talk sooner than expected," Samuel muttered, reaching for his rifle. Samuel quickly helped Running Bear sit up and handed him a pistol from his bedside drawer. "Can you use this if you need to?" Running Bear nodded grimly, checking the weapon with practiced hands. "Yes, but I hope we do not need to." The 3 riders approached Samuel's front porch at a leisurely pace, but their casual demeanor didn't fool him. These men moved like predators, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. Samuel recognized the type from his years on the frontier, men who lived by violence and saw conflict as opportunity. Samuel stepped onto his front porch, rifle held loosely but ready. "Morning, gentlemen. Something I can help you with?" The lead rider, a thin man with a scraggly beard and cold blue eyes, tipped his hat in mock politeness. "Morning, friend. Name's Jake Morrison. We're looking for a wounded Apache that might have passed through here. Dangerous savage who attacked some folks down south." Samuel kept his expression neutral. "Haven't seen any Apache around here. This is cattle country." Morrison's eyes narrowed as he studied Samuel's face. "That's funny because we followed a blood trail that leads right to your front door. You sure you haven't seen anything unusual?" "Blood could be from anything," Samuel replied calmly. "Had to put down a sick calf yesterday. Lot of blood when you're butchering." The second rider, a burly man with arms like tree trunks, spat into the dust. "Maybe we should take a look around, Jake. Make sure this rancher's telling the truth." Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle. "This is private property and you're not welcome here. I suggest you move along." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Now that's not very neighborly. We're just trying to keep good folks safe from murderous savages. Surely you understand that. What I understand is that you're trespassing, Samuel said firmly, and I'm asking you politely to leave. The third man, younger than the others but with dead eyes that belonged on someone much older, slowly reached toward his gun. Maybe we don't need to ask permission, Morrison. Maybe we just take what we came for. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. Samuel could feel sweat beating on his forehead despite the morning chill. These men were killers, and they weren't going to leave without searching his house. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he wouldn't let them harm Running Bear. Just as Morrison opened his mouth to give an order, the sound of thundering hooves echoed across the plains. Samuel glanced past the three men and felt his jaw drop. A line of riders was approaching from the east, moving fast and kicking up a cloud of dust that stretched across the horizon. Morrison and his men wheeled their horses around, and Samuel heard one of them curse. The approaching riders were Apache warriors, at least 30 of them, riding in perfect formation with the morning sun at their backs. They moved like a single organism, their horses seeming to fly across the ground. Jesus Christ, the burly man whispered. Where did they come from? Samuel felt a mixture of awe and terror as the warriors drew closer. These weren't the ragged fighters described in newspaper accounts. They rode with military precision, their weapons held ready but not raised in immediate threat. At their head rode an older man with gray streaking his long black hair, and a bearing that spoke of absolute authority. Morrison was already backing his horse away from the porch. This ain't over, rancher. That Apache's got something that belongs to us and we'll be back for it. I told you, there's no Apache here, Samuel called after them, but Morrison and his men were already spurring their horses toward the distant hills, clearly wanting no part of a fight with 30 Apache warriors. The war party reached Samuel's ranch and formed a perfect semicircle around his house. The leader walked his horse forward until he was close enough for Samuel to see the intelligence in his dark eyes, and the silver ornaments braided into his hair. Samuel lowered his rifle but kept it ready. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to stand straight and meet the chief's gaze. I'm Samuel Mackenzie. This is my land. The chief studied him for a long moment, then spoke in clear, unaccented English. I am Chief Gray Wolf of the Mescalero Apache. I seek my son, Running Bear. His horse returned to us without him. Samuel felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He could lie, try to protect Running Bear by denying his presence, but something in the chief's manner told him that dishonesty would only make things worse. These warriors could search his house easily enough, and they would find Running Bear whether he cooperated or not. Your son is here, Samuel said simply. He was wounded. I've been caring for him. A murmur ran through the assembled warriors, but Chief Gray Wolf raised his hand for silence. You have tended to a wounded Apache? I tended to a wounded man, Samuel corrected gently. He needed help. Chief Gray Wolf dismounted and walked toward the porch with measured steps. This is unexpected. May I see my son? Samuel nodded and stepped aside, gesturing toward his front door. Of course. But I should warn you, he's got a broken leg and a bullet wound. He needs rest. Chief Gray Wolf paused at the threshold, looking around Samuel's simple home. His eyes took in the clean wooden floors, the handmade furniture, and the smell of coffee and fresh bread that lingered in the air. You brought him into your own house? Where else would I take him? Samuel asked, genuinely puzzled by the question. The chief's weathered face showed the first hint of surprise. Most white men would not bring an Apache into their home. They would think we carry disease or that we would steal from them. Samuel shrugged. Most Apache wouldn't carry a peace message to try to stop a war either. Maybe we're both full of surprises. They found Running Bear sitting up in bed, alert and watching the door. When he saw his father, relief flooded his young face. The two men spoke rapidly in Apache, and Samuel caught the urgency in their voices even though he couldn't understand the words. Finally, Chief Gray Wolf turned to Samuel. My son tells me you saved his life. He also tells me that white men who were not soldiers shot him and tried to steal the peace papers he carries. Samuel nodded. 3 of them were here just before you arrived. They claimed Running Bear had attacked some folks, but I think they were lying. They were, Running Bear said from the bed. I recognized one of them. He was at the trading post last month, selling rifles to young warriors who wanted to continue fighting. He told them the army was planning to attack our village. Chief Gray Wolf's jaw tightened. And was the army planning such an attack? Not according to the Indian agent at Fort Stockton, Running Bear replied. That is why I was carrying the peace papers. The agent wants to meet with you to discuss a treaty. But these men do not want peace. They make money from war. Samuel felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. Gunrunners. They sell weapons to both sides and then stir up trouble to keep the fighting going. I've heard rumors about men like that. Chief Grey Wolf walked to the window and looked out at his waiting warriors. If this is true, then both our peoples are being manipulated by men who profit from our blood. What was in the message? Samuel asked carefully. Running Bear reached for the leather pouch around his neck and withdrew a folded paper sealed with wax. The Indian agent wants to arrange a meeting, a real peace council, with witnesses from the territorial government. He says there are people in Washington who want to end the fighting. Samuel studied the seal on the document. It looked official, with the territorial seal pressed into the red wax. Why didn't the agent just send soldiers with the message? Why trust it to one man riding alone? Because my son volunteered, Chief Grey Wolf said quietly. He lost his younger brother in the last battle with the cavalry. He wants no more Apache children to die from white man's bullets, and no more white children to die from Apache arrows. The simple honesty of the statement hit Samuel like a physical blow. He thought about his own losses, about his wife Martha, who had died from fever 2 years ago because the nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away. He thought about the children he and Martha had never had, and about all the children who were dying because grown men couldn't find a way to live in peace. Those men who were here, Samuel said slowly, they'll be back. They're not going to give up on stopping this peace message from getting through. Chief Grey Wolf nodded grimly. I know. And now they know that you helped my son. They will want revenge against you as well. Samuel had already thought of that, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. His ranch, his livelihood, his very life were now at risk because he had chosen to help a wounded stranger. Some men might have regretted that choice, but Samuel found that he didn't. So what do we do? He asked. Chief Grey Wolf looked at his son, then back at Samuel. We make sure the message gets through. But first we must get my son to safety where he can heal properly. He can heal here, Samuel said quickly. I've got plenty of food and water, and this house is solid stone. It'll take more than 3 men to force their way in. You would do this? Chief Grey Wolf asked. You would risk your life for Apache peace? Samuel thought about the question for a moment. I'm not risking my life for Apache peace, he said finally. I'm risking it for peace, period. I'm tired of reading about dead children in the newspapers. I'm tired of good men dying because they're afraid of each other. Running Bear spoke up from the bed. Father, this man saved my life when he could have left me to die. He tended my wounds when he could have turned me over to those killers. He gave me his own bed and shared his food. I trust him. Chief Grey Wolf stood silent for a long moment, looking between his son and the white rancher who had shown kindness to a stranger. Outside, Samuel could hear the horses moving restlessly and the low murmur of warriors speaking among themselves. Finally, the chief reached a decision that would change the course of history for both their peoples. Chief Grey Wolf walked to the window and signaled to his warriors with a series of hand gestures. Samuel watched in fascination as the men immediately began setting up what appeared to be a defensive perimeter around his ranch house. Some rode out to high ground where they could watch for approaching riders, while others gathered the horses and secured them near the barn. You're setting up camp here? Samuel asked. My son cannot travel safely with his injuries, Chief Grey Wolf replied, and you cannot defend this place alone against Morrison and his men. They will return with more fighters and they will be angry. Samuel felt a mix of gratitude and apprehension. Having 30 Apache warriors protecting his ranch was certainly better than facing Morrison's gang alone, but it also meant that every rancher and settler within 50 miles would soon know that Samuel Mackenzie was harboring Apache on his land. Running Bear struggled to sit up straighter. Father, we cannot stay long. The Peace Council meeting is in 5 days. If I do not deliver the message in time, the opportunity will be lost. Chief Grey Wolf sat down heavily in Samuel's chair. For the first time, Samuel could see the weight of leadership on the older man's shoulders. Your leg is broken, my son. You cannot ride for at least 2 weeks. Then someone else must carry the message, Running Bear said urgently. Choose another warrior. Choose Swift Eagle or Black Horse. The chief shook his head. The Indian agent specifically asked for you. He said his superiors in Washington want to meet the Apache who volunteered to risk his life for peace. Your name is already known to them. Samuel had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding. What if he doesn't have to ride? He asked quietly. Both Apache men looked at him curiously. I've got a wagon, Samuel continued. A good one with springs and padding. If we fixed up a bed in the back, Running Bear could travel in relative comfort. It would take longer than riding, but he could rest while we moved. Chief Gray Wolf considered this idea. Who would drive this wagon? You, Samuel nodded. Me and a couple of my ranch hands. And I trust we could get Running Bear to Fort Stockton safely. The fort is 4 days' travel by wagon, the chief pointed out, and Morrison's men will be watching the roads. They will try to stop you. Not if they don't know we're coming, Samuel said, an idea forming in his mind. What if we don't take the main road? I know this country pretty well. There are old cattle trails that would get us there without using the regular wagon routes. Running Bear's eyes lit up with hope. It could work, Father. And if Mr. Mackenzie comes with me to the Peace Council, the white officials will see that not all whites want war. They will see that cooperation is possible. Chief Gray Wolf stood and walked to the window again, watching his warriors as they went about their tasks with quiet efficiency. Samuel could see the man weighing risks and possibilities, calculating what this decision might mean for his people. If you do this thing, the chief said finally, you will make enemies. Men like Morrison have friends in high places. They will try to destroy you. Samuel thought about his ranch, his cattle, the life he had built from nothing. Then he thought about Running Bear's quiet courage and the chief's dignity in the face of impossible choices. Maybe it's time somebody stood up to men like Morrison. A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. One of the Apache scouts came riding hard toward the house, calling out in his native language. Chief Gray Wolf stepped onto the porch to hear the report, then returned with a grim expression. Morrison has returned with 12 men, he announced. They are positioned on the ridge overlooking your ranch. They appear to be waiting for something. Samuel grabbed his spyglass and climbed onto his roof for a better view. Sure enough, he could make out the shapes of men and horses silhouetted against the sky. They were too far away for accurate shooting, but close enough to watch every move around the ranch house. They're waiting for your warriors to leave, Samuel realized as he climbed back down. They know they can't fight 30 Apache and win, so they're going to wait us out. Chief Gray Wolf nodded grimly. And if we stay too long, other white settlers will hear about Apache warriors camped at your ranch. They will come with soldiers and guns. It was a perfect trap. Morrison didn't need to attack. He just needed to wait. Time was on his side. Either the Apache would have to leave Running Bear behind, or they would have to stay and risk a larger conflict that could destroy any chance of peace. Running Bear spoke up from the bedroom. There is another way, a dangerous way, but it might work. Samuel and Chief Gray Wolf returned to his bedside. What if we split up? Running Bear suggested. Some of the warriors could leave openly, making it appear that they have given up and returned to the reservation. Morrison's men will follow them, thinking I am with that group. Meanwhile, a smaller group stays hidden here until it is time to leave for Fort Stockton. Chief Gray Wolf frowned. Too risky. If Morrison discovers the deception, you will be trapped here with only a few defenders. Samuel felt an idea stirring. Not if we make the deception even better, he said slowly. What if we make Morrison think he's already won? Samuel outlined his plan carefully. We stage a fake argument. You and your warriors leave in anger, making sure Morrison's men can see and hear everything. I'll play the part of the angry rancher who's tired of harboring Apache and wants you gone. Running Bear stays hidden in my root cellar while Morrison thinks he left with you. Chief Gray Wolf listened intently. And then? Tomorrow night, when Morrison thinks he's won and lets his guard down, I load Running Bear into my wagon, and we take the old mining trail toward Fort Stockton. It's rough country, but I know it well. Morrison won't expect us to go that way. Running Bear nodded eagerly. It could work. Morrison thinks white men will always choose their own kind over Apache. He will believe that you have turned against us. The plan was risky, but it was better than their other options. Chief Gray Wolf called several of his most trusted warriors into the house to explain the strategy. Samuel was impressed by how quickly they grasped the details and began suggesting improvements. An hour later, the performance began. Chief Gray Wolf stormed out of Samuel's house, shouting in Apache and gesturing angrily. Samuel followed, yelling at the top of his lungs about ungrateful savages and his regret at helping them. The argument was loud enough to carry across the plains to Morrison's watchers. "I should have left your son to die," Samuel shouted, making sure his voice carried. "Get off my land and take your wounded warrior with you." Chief Grey Wolf pointed dramatically at the house and replied in Apache, but Samuel could hear the carefully, controlled tone that suggested the chief was actually giving instructions to his men, rather than arguing. The departure was perfectly staged. Several warriors appeared to carry a blanket-wrapped form from the house and load it onto a travois behind one of the horses. To distant observers, it would look exactly like a wounded man being transported. In reality, it was a bundle of Samuel's old clothes and grain sacks. As the Apache warriors rode away toward the east, Samuel stood on his porch, shaking his fist and shouting curses until they disappeared over a rise. Then he went back inside and helped Running Bear down into his root cellar, a cool, dark space beneath the kitchen where he stored vegetables and preserved foods. "This is harder than being shot," Running Bear muttered as Samuel helped him settle onto a makeshift bed. His broken leg made movement painful, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. Samuel arranged supplies in the cellar: food, water, blankets, and a chamber pot. "You'll need to stay quiet no matter what you hear up above. Morrison's men will probably come to search the house once they think your father is gone." As predicted, Morrison and his gang arrived at Samuel's ranch just before sunset. Samuel was ready for them, sitting on his porch with a bottle of whiskey and doing his best impression of a man drowning his sorrows. "Heard you had some trouble with Apache today," Morrison said, dismounting with a satisfied smirk. Samuel took a swig from the bottle and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Trouble doesn't begin to cover it. Ungrateful savages nearly got me killed, and for what? For helping one of their wounded." Morrison's eyes gleamed. "So you admit you were hiding an Apache?" "Was," Samuel emphasized. Past tense. "Soon as I realized what I'd gotten myself into, I told them to get that wounded buck off my property and never come back." The gunrunner studied Samuel's face carefully. "Mind if we take a look around just to make sure they're really gone?" Samuel waved the bottle dismissively. "Look all you want. Check the barn, check the bunkhouse, check under my bed if it makes you feel better. Just don't track mud on my floors." Morrison and his men spent an hour searching every building on the ranch. They looked in the barn, the tool shed, the bunkhouse, and even the chicken coop. Samuel held his breath when they entered the kitchen directly above the root cellar, but Running Bear remained silent as death below the floorboards. Finally satisfied, Morrison gathered his men and prepared to leave. "You did the right thing, Mackenzie. Apache can't be trusted. They would have turned on you eventually." Samuel nodded and took another drink. "Live and learn, I guess. Next time I'll let wounded strangers die where I find them." After Morrison's gang rode away, Samuel waited another 2 hours before opening the root cellar. Running Bear was pale and sweating from pain and the stress of remaining motionless, but he managed a weak smile. "You are a good actor," he said as Samuel helped him back upstairs. "My wife always said I had a talent for storytelling," Samuel replied, "though I never thought I'd use it to fool gun runners." They spent the rest of the evening preparing for the journey to Fort Stockton. Samuel loaded his wagon with supplies and rigged a comfortable bed in the back with plenty of padding and blankets. He also cleaned and oiled his rifles, knowing that if Morrison discovered their deception, there would be violence. As Samuel was checking the wagon's wheels by lantern light, he heard the soft sound of approaching horses. His hand moved instinctively to his gun, but then he recognized the distinctive whistle of an Apache scout. Chief Grey Wolf materialized out of the darkness like a ghost, leading 2 other warriors. They had circled back under cover of night, leaving the rest of the war party to continue eastward and draw off any pursuers. "Morrison took the bait," Samuel reported quietly. "His men searched everywhere and found nothing. They think Running Bear left with you." Chief Grey Wolf nodded approvingly. "And tomorrow you will take my son to Fort Stockton?" "At first light," Samuel confirmed. "We'll take the old mining trail through Devil's Canyon. It's rough, but it should get us there without being seen." The chief clasped Samuel's shoulder in a gesture of respect. "You risk much for people who are not your own." Samuel looked up at the stars scattered across the vast Texas sky. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've all forgotten that we're sharing the same land under the same sky. Maybe it's time to stop thinking about your people and my people and start thinking about just people. Chief Gray Wolf smiled for the first time since arriving at the ranch. You sound like Running Bear. He has said such things since he was a boy. As dawn approached, Samuel made final preparations for what might be the most important journey of his life. Samuel's wagon rolled out of his ranch just as the eastern sky began to lighten. Running Bear lay in the padded bed covered with blankets and supplies to disguise his presence. Two of Samuel's most trusted ranch hands, Tom Bradley and Miguel Santos, rode alongside as guards. Both men had worked for Samuel for years and knew how to handle themselves in dangerous situations. The old mining trail wound through some of the most rugged country in Texas. It had been carved out 20 years earlier by prospectors seeking silver in the mountains, but the mines had played out and the trail was rarely used now. Samuel knew it would add a full day to their journey, but it was their best hope of avoiding Morrison's men. The first day passed without incident. They made good time despite the rough terrain, and Running Bear tolerated the journey better than expected. His shoulder wound was healing cleanly, and while his broken leg still caused him pain, he remained alert and optimistic about the Peace Council. That evening, they camped in a hidden canyon with good water and shelter from the wind. Samuel built a small, smokeless fire and prepared a simple meal while Tom and Miguel took turns standing guard. Running Bear managed to sit up and eat with appetite, which Samuel took as a good sign. "Tell me about this Indian agent," Samuel said, as they shared coffee around the dying fire. "Can he be trusted?" Running Bear considered the question carefully. "Agent Morrison is an honest man, though he shares a name with our enemy. He has 2 Apache children in his household, orphans from the fighting. He treats them as his own. I think he truly wants peace." Samuel was startled by the coincidence of names, but decided it was just one of those strange twists that life sometimes provided. "And the territorial officials? Will they listen to him?" "Some will. Others profit from the conflict, just like the gun runners. But Agent Morrison says there are new people in Washington, people who want to try a different way." The second day brought their first real challenge. Miguel, who had ridden ahead to scout the trail, came galloping back with urgent news. "Riders coming up the main trail from the south," he reported breathlessly. "Maybe 8 or 10 of them, moving fast." Samuel felt his stomach clench. They were still a day and a half from Fort Stockton, traveling through country with few places to hide a wagon. Could you tell who they were? Too far to be sure, but they had the look of Morrison's type. "Hard men with too many guns," Tom Bradley spat into the dust. "How'd they find us?" "We've been careful to cover our tracks." Running Bear struggled to sit up in the wagon bed. "Perhaps they did not find us. Perhaps they are simply checking all the trails to Fort Stockton." Samuel studied the terrain around them. The mining trail wound along the bottom of a narrow valley, with steep rocky walls on both sides. There were few places where a wagon could leave the trail, and nowhere to hide if riders came looking. "There's an old mine shaft about 2 miles ahead," Samuel said finally. "Big enough to hide the wagon if we can get there first." "Miguel, how much time do we have?" "Maybe an hour if they keep moving at the same pace." They pushed the horses as hard as they dared, with Tom riding ahead to clear rocks and obstacles from the trail. The wagon bounced and jolted over the rough ground, and Samuel could hear Running Bear gritting his teeth against the pain. But the young Apache never complained. The mine shaft was exactly where Samuel remembered it. A dark opening carved into the hillside with enough room to conceal their wagon and horses. They had just finished covering their tracks when the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Samuel crept to the mouth of the mine and peered out carefully. 8 riders were moving slowly along the trail, studying the ground for signs of passage. Even at a distance, he could see that these were Morrison's men, armed to the teeth and looking for trouble. The riders stopped directly in front of the mine entrance. Samuel held his breath, knowing that discovery now would mean a fight they couldn't win. One of the men dismounted and walked to the base of the hill, examining the rocky ground with the skill of an experienced tracker. "Fresh horse droppings," the man called to his companions. "Can't be more than an hour old." Samuel's heart sank. Despite their efforts to clean up, they had missed something. He slowly drew his pistol, knowing that if the man looked up toward the mine entrance, their hiding place would be discovered. The tracker followed the scattered signs toward the hillside, his eyes scanning back and forth across the rocky slope. He was maybe 50 yards from the mine entrance when a sharp whistle echoed from the ridge above. All the riders looked up to see an Apache warrior silhouetted against the sky, sitting motionless on his horse. It was one of Chief Grey Wolf's men, and Samuel realized the chief had posted guards to watch over their escape route. "Apache," one of Morrison's men shouted, reaching for his rifle. The warrior on the ridge gave another whistle, and suddenly the hills came alive with answering calls. Morrison's men found themselves surrounded by unseen Apache scouts, their positions marked by the distinctive whistles echoing from every direction. The tracker abandoned his investigation and ran back to his horse. "Let's get out of here," he shouted. "We're outnumbered." Morrison's gang spurred their horses and galloped back down the trail, leaving clouds of dust in their wake. The Apache whistles continued for several minutes, creating the impression of a large war party, then gradually faded into silence. Samuel waited another hour before emerging from the mine. As they resumed their journey, he spotted movement on the ridge and raised his hand in a gesture of gratitude. The Apache scout acknowledged with a brief wave before disappearing over the crest of the hill. "Your father thinks of everything," Samuel said to Running Bear. The young Apache smiled weakly. "He has kept our people alive for many years. He knows that survival often depends on appearing stronger than you really are." They reached Fort Stockton late in the afternoon of the third day. The fort was a collection of adobe buildings surrounded by a wooden stockade, flying the American flag and bustling with the activity of soldiers and civilians. Samuel had expected to feel nervous approaching an army post with an Apache in his wagon, but instead he felt hopeful. Agent Morrison turned out to be a tall, thin man with kind eyes and graying hair. He greeted them at the fort's main gate with obvious relief. "Mr. Mackenzie, I presume? And Running Bear? Thank God you made it safely. We heard rumors that armed men were trying to stop you." As they helped Running Bear into the agent's office, Samuel was struck by the man's genuine concern for the wounded Apache. This was clearly someone who saw people as individuals rather than as representatives of warring tribes. The territorial governor arrived yesterday, Agent Morrison explained as he examined Running Bear's injuries. "He's brought officials from Washington just as promised. They're very interested in hearing what you have to say about peace between our peoples." Running Bear reached into his leather pouch and withdrew the carefully preserved peace papers. "My father sends these along with his hope that the killing can finally end." Agent Morrison read the documents carefully, then looked up with a smile. "This is exactly what we needed. Chief Grey Wolf's proposals are reasonable and specific. I think we can build a real peace treaty from this foundation." Over the next 2 days, Samuel watched in amazement as Running Bear met with territorial officials, army officers, and government representatives from Washington. The young Apache spoke with eloquence and dignity about his people's desire for peace, their willingness to live alongside white settlers, and their hope for a future where children of both races could grow up without fear. Samuel also found himself drawn into the discussions. The officials were fascinated by his account of helping Running Bear and working with Chief Grey Wolf. They saw in his story proof that cooperation between whites and Apache was not only possible but potentially beneficial for everyone. On the final day of the Peace Council, Running Bear stood before the assembled officials and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "My people have fought bravely and your people have fought bravely. But bravery in war is easy compared to the courage needed for peace. Today we choose the harder path. Today, we choose to trust each other with our children's future." The formal peace treaty was signed that afternoon, with Running Bear adding his mark alongside the signatures of territorial officials and army commanders. Samuel signed as a witness, his hand shaking slightly as he realized the historical significance of the moment. As they prepared to return to Samuel's ranch, Agent Morrison pulled him aside. "You've done something remarkable here, Mr. Mackenzie. You've shown that ordinary people can bridge the gap between cultures when they choose compassion over fear. I hope you realize the importance of what you've accomplished." Samuel looked at Running Bear, who was saying goodbye to the Apache scouts who had protected their journey. The young man's leg was healing well and his shoulder wound had closed cleanly. More importantly, his eyes held the light of hope fulfilled. "I just gave water to a thirsty man," Samuel said quietly. "Everything else followed from that." As their wagon rolled back toward the ranch, Samuel reflected on the extraordinary chain of